Hidden beneath the streets of our modern world are the ghosts of a technology so advanced it rivals our own. We often believe that human progress is a steady climb from simple stones to complex circuits. The truth is far more mysterious and suggests that our ancestors reached heights of engineering that simply vanished into the shadows of time. We are going to uncover 30 ancient inventions that were lost for over 1,000 years and explore the brilliant minds that created them. By the time we reach the end, you will understand how the most significant breakthroughs in history were once forgotten and why our own modern world might be more fragile than it seems. How could a bronze device from a shipwreck predict the movement of the stars with more precision than any clock built for the next 15 centuries? Why did a specific type of steel used in legendary blades become impossible to recreate for hundreds of years? Looking back at these lost relics gives us a new perspective on the resilience and genius of those who came before us. What would our world look like today if these great discoveries had never been forgotten? A tangled mass of corroded bronze found at the bottom of the Aegean Sea changed everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. When divers first recovered the Antikythera Mechanism from a Roman shipwreck, they assumed they had found a simple astrolabe or perhaps a decorative piece of jewelry. It was only when modern researchers used X-ray scanners to peer inside the calcified layers that they realized they were staring at an analog computer. This intricate device was composed of over 30 interlocking gear wheels, neatly carved with teeth that were only millimeters long. It was designed to calculate the positions of the Sun, the Moon, and 5 known planets with breathtaking precision. For someone living 2,000 years ago, this was like possessing a digital watch in the middle of a desert. The mechanism could predict lunar and solar eclipses years in advance and even tracked the 4-year cycle of the athletic games held across Greece. This level of mechanical complexity was thought to be impossible before the 14th century, yet here was a device that existed while empires were still in their infancy. Historians like Derek J. Dusola Price were stunned because the level of craftsmanship required to build these differential gears vanished from the historical record for over 1,000 years. It makes us wonder how much of our collective genius was lost simply because the materials were recycled or the knowledge was never written down. This bronze wonder is a haunting reminder of a high-tech past that almost stayed buried forever. While these gears measured the heavens, other ancient builders were perfecting a material that would allow their monuments to survive long after their names were forgotten. Modern engineers often look at the Pantheon in Rome with a sense of disbelief because its massive dome has remained standing for 2,000 years without any steel reinforcement. While our modern concrete structures might show signs of wear and tear within 50 or 100 years, the Roman version actually becomes tougher as the centuries go by. This extraordinary durability was the result of a precise and ingenious chemical recipe that scientists only recently began to fully understand. The Romans mixed a specific type of volcanic ash with lime and seawater, sparking a chemical reaction that created a rare mineral called aluminum tobamorite. This mineral is the key to their success because it does not just sit there as a passive stone. When seawater or moisture seeps into the tiny cracks of a Roman harbor or wall, the minerals react with the water to grow new crystals. This means the concrete can actually heal itself, filling its own gaps and strengthening the overall structure over time. For 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, this recipe was entirely forgotten. Builders in the Middle Ages were forced to use far weaker mortars and smaller stones because they simply could not replicate the massive, seamless pores of the Roman era. The loss of this material meant that the secrets of building giant domes and long-lasting maritime ports disappeared from Europe, leaving people to wonder how their ancestors had managed to build things that seemed to defy the natural cycle of decay. As we look at these massive walls, we also have to consider the precision required to shape the ancient world in such a way that every stone and every joint fit together with the accuracy of a puzzle. Clashing against the finest armor of the Middle Ages, the blades of the Near East possessed a strength that seemed almost supernatural to those who faced them. These legendary weapons, known as Damascus steel, were forged with a swirling, watery pattern etched into the metal that signaled a quality far beyond anything being produced in Europe at the time. A warrior carrying a Damascus blade could rely on his weapon to be both incredibly hard and remarkably flexible, a combination that is usually impossible to achieve in metallurgy. If a sword is too hard, it becomes brittle and shatters like glass upon impact. If it is too soft, its shape bends and loses its edge. Yet these ancient smiths perfected a balance that allowed a blade to slice through a silk scarf floating in the air or bend nearly double without ever snapping. The secret lay in the raw material, a specific type of iron ore called wootz steel that was imported from mines in India. To create the final product, the steel had to be heated and folded at very specific temperatures, allowing impurities to form microscopic structures that gave the metal its signature toughness. By the 1800s, the knowledge of how to forge these masterpieces had completely vanished. As the specific mines ran dry and the oral traditions of the master smiths died out, the world lost the ability to recreate the legendary flowing patterns and the resilience of the original blades. Modern researchers who have studied the surviving fragments under powerful microscopes were shocked to find something they did not expect. They discovered that these ancient blades contained carbon nanotubes, which are cylindrical structures of carbon atoms that provide immense strength. This suggests that without the use of electricity or modern chemistry, these blacksmiths were essentially practicing a form of nanotechnology. They were manipulating the very molecular structure of the metal to create a military technology that was centuries ahead of its time. The fact that such a sophisticated process was lost for hundreds of years reminds us that even the most advanced materials depend on fragile links of trade and tradition. If the ancients could control the building blocks of metal with such precision, it raises the question of what other hidden forces they might have mastered to bring light and energy into their lives. Deep within the dusty records of the 1930s, researchers in Iraq uncovered a collection of humble clay jars that challenged every timeline we had established for the history of energy. These small vessels, no larger than a man's hand, contained a very specific arrangement of a copper cylinder and a single iron rod held in place by a plug of asphalt. To a modern electrical engineer, this setup is instantly recognizable as the basic design of a battery. If these jars were filled with an acidic liquid like lemon juice or wine, they would have been capable of producing a small but steady electrical current roughly 2,000 years ago. This discovery, often called the Baghdad Battery, suggests that ancient craftsmen may have harnessed the power of a low-voltage charge long before the world had a name for electricity. While we do not have evidence of ancient light bulbs or complex circuits, the most likely use for such a device was electroplating. By using a light current, a jeweler could coat a silver object with a thin, beautiful layer of gold, a technique that would have seemed like pure magic to anyone watching. Some historians also suggest these shocks might have been used in a medicinal way to dull pain, or as a trick used by priests to make metal statues feel as though they were buzzing with divine energy. Regardless of their daily use, the existence of these jars predates the work of Alessandro Volta by nearly 2,000 years. When the knowledge of how to create and store this energy was lost, the secret of the spark vanished from the human story for centuries. This disappearance forced the world to wait until the modern era to rediscover how to capture the invisible forces of nature. As we consider how the ancients mastered the elements of earth and energy, it becomes clear that their reach extended far beyond the shore, leading them to develop tools that could conquer the open ocean. Legends of the North once spoke of glowing gems that could pull the sun right through the thickest clouds or heaviest fog. For centuries, historians dismissed these stories of the Viking Sunstone as mere folklore or poetic exaggerations found in the old sagas. They believed it was impossible for medieval sailors to navigate the treacherous, grey waters of the North Atlantic without a magnetic compass or a clear view of the horizon. However, the discovery of a unique type of calcite crystal on a shipwreck near the English Channel suggests the Vikings possessed an optical tool far more sophisticated than anyone realized. This crystal, often called Iceland spar, has a remarkable property known as double refraction. When held up to the sky, the mineral splits the incoming sunlight into two separate beams based on the polarization of the light. By rotating the stone and observing where the two beams become equal in brightness, a navigator can pinpoint the exact position of the sun, even if it is hidden behind a dense layer of storm clouds or has dipped just below the horizon. This allowed Norse explorers to maintain a straight and reliable course during journeys that lasted for weeks across the open ocean. Unlike a magnetic compass, which can be thrown off by iron deposits or shifts in the magnetic field, the sunstone relied on the unchanging physics of light. When the traditional Viking way of life began to transform and the magnetic compass arrived from the east, the highly specialized skill of reading these crystals began to wither away. Within a few generations, the master navigators who understood the subtle dance of light and mineral were gone, leaving behind only riddles in ancient poems that would take 1,000 years for modern science to decode. While these mariners were mastering the optics of the sea, the great cities of the ancient world were developing their own invisible wonders to manage the complexities of urban life. Turning from the spray of the ocean toward the heart of the empire, we find that the ancients were surprisingly obsessed with cleanliness and the movement of water through stone. Flowing through the brick-lined streets of the Indus Valley 4,000 years ago was a level of engineering that most modern cities would not achieve for several millennia. While we often think of plumbing as a relatively recent luxury, the people of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had already mastered the science of moving waste and water away from their homes. They built their cities on a grid system with a focus on hygiene that was unprecedented for the era. Almost every household had a dedicated bathing area and a latrine that connected to a sophisticated network of covered sewers made of baked brick. These drains were not just simple trenches but were carefully sloped to allow gravity to pull water along while verhindering clogs. The builders even included removable stone covers and manholes at regular intervals, allowing workers to inspect and clean the system to ensure the health of the community. This indicates a deep understanding of hydraulics and public health that was essentially lost after the civilization began to fade. When these great cities were eventually abandoned, the blueprint for centralized urban sanitation vanished with them. For the next several thousand years, the inhabitants of many major cities across the globe lived in environments where waste was often simply thrown into the streets. This lack of infrastructure led to the rapid spread of illness and shaped the course of human history through devastating plagues that might have been avoided if the lessons of the Indus Valley had been preserved. It is a sobering thought that for nearly 20 centuries, humanity lived in conditions far less sanitary than those enjoyed by the builders of the Bronze Age. The recovery of this knowledge only began in the late 1800s when modern engineers finally realized that the secret to a thriving city lay in the invisible pipes beneath their feet. This mastery over the physical environment was matched by an equally impressive ability to send information across vast distances, using methods that transformed the speed of human connection. Through the use of light and height, ancient leaders discovered how to bridge the gap between empires in a matter of hours. Harsh winds sweeping across the deserts of ancient Persia were not seen as a burden but as a source of tireless power. While much of the world was still relying on animal or human labor to process food, the engineers of the Sistan region were building towering structures that could capture the invisible force of the air. These machines, known as painmones, were vertical axis windmills that looked very different from the four-bladed fans we usually associate with the European countryside. They were constructed with walls of mud brick that funneled the blowing air into a central chamber where a series of vertical sails made of reed or wood would spin around a central pole. Because the wind in this region, known as the wind of 120 days, blew with such predictable ferocity, these mills could run for months at a time without stopping. This allowed a single structure to grind massive quantities of grain or lift water from deep underground to nourish crops in one of the driest places on Earth. The genius of the Persian design lay in its simplicity and its ability to work regardless of which direction the wind was blowing, provided the walls were positioned to catch the gust. For centuries, this early mastery of renewable energy provided a level of industrial consistency that was rare in the ancient world. However, as trade routes shifted and different technological designs took root in the West, the specific geometry of the vertical windmill was largely forgotten outside of Central Asia. The world eventually favored the horizontal windmill, which was easier to scale for larger sails but often required more complex gearing to function. Today, modern engineers are returning to these ancient Persian blueprints to find inspiration for new types of wind turbines that are more efficient in turbulent urban environments. It is a striking example of how a solution found over 1,000 years ago is once again becoming a vital part of our conversation about sustainability. As we look at how the ancients harnessed the wind to power their lives, we must also consider how they captured the very essence of time with machines that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the world. Droplets of water falling at a perfectly timed rhythm once powered the most accurate clocks in the ancient Mediterranean. While a simple sundial could tell the hour on a clear day, it was useless in the dark or under a heavy blanket of clouds. The engineer Ctesibius solved this problem by designing a hydraulic masterpiece known as a water clock that functioned with the precision of a modern stopwatch. Unlike earlier versions that grew slower as the water level dropped, his device used a constant pressure system to ensure that every second was measured with equal weight. Inside these towering machines, water would flow into a cylinder, slowly lifting a floating pedestal that held a pointer against a rotating drum. This drum was carved with specialized charts that accounted for the changing lengths of days and nights throughout the seasons. These were not just functional tools but grand spectacles of Hellenistic genius, often featuring mechanical birds that sang or figurines that pointed toward the passing hours with golden wands. Some models even included early forms of programmable alarms, dropping heavy metal balls into bronze bowls to wake their owners at a specific time. This peak of ancient timekeeping required a deep understanding of fluid dynamics and precision gearing that would not be seen again for over a millennium. When the Roman world began to fracture, the highly skilled craftsmen who knew how to calibrate these delicate valves and floats disappeared, taking their expertise with them. The loss of the water clock meant that for centuries, humanity fell back into an era of temporal shadows where time was measured in broad, imprecise strokes using melting candles or hourglasses. Without the ability to track small intervals of time accurately, scientific experiments and complex navigation suffered, leaving the world a bit more disconnected. The fading of such intricate technology reminds us that even the most clever machines are only as permanent as the hands that know how to fix them. As these clocks stopped ticking, another civilization was developing a chemical secret that would safeguard their borders with a flame that even the sea could not extinguish. Flames that could dance on the surface of the ocean provided the Byzantine Empire with a shield of liquid lightning. This terrifying substance, famously known as Greek fire, was a liquid incendiary that defied the natural laws of the era by burning even more fiercely when it touched water. It was often launched from specialized bronze tubes mounted on the bows of warships, resembling a prehistoric flamethrower that could incinerate enemy fleets from a distance. The sight of a glowing stream of fire arcing across the waves and clinging to wooden hulls struck a deep psychological fear into any who dared to challenge the walls of Constantinople. What made this weapon truly exceptional was its sticky consistency, which allowed it to cling to surfaces and people like a burning gel that could not be wiped away. For centuries, the exact chemical composition was a closely guarded state secret, known only to the emperors and a select few families who manufactured the mixture in hidden laboratories. So intense was the security surrounding this formula that anyone caught attempting to leak the secret faced immediate and severe consequences. Despite numerous attempts by rival powers to capture the technology, they were never able to replicate the specific combination of naphtha, quicklime, and resins that gave the fire its unique properties. As the empire gradually declined and its central administration became more fragmented, the oral tradition and written records of the recipe were eventually lost to the ruins of time. Modern researchers have spent decades experimenting with various ingredients to recreate the effect, yet they have struggled to find a mixture that possesses both the self-igniting quality and the relentless adhesive power of the original. The vanishing of Greek fire meant that the Mediterranean once again became a place where numbers and raw physical power decided the outcome of naval battles, rather than a single technological advantage. This loss reminds us that even the most powerful defensive secrets can become whispers if the chain of human knowledge is broken. While the sea was being guarded by these unquenchable flames, other civilizations were focusing their genius on the very ground they walked upon, creating networks of communication that would outlive their inventors by centuries. A wine goblet carved from an iridescent block of stone seems to defy the very laws of physics as it shifts from a deep jade green to a glowing blood red. This masterpiece, known as the Lycurgus Cup, represents a peak of Roman craftsmanship that was so advanced it would not be understood by modern science until the late 20th century. To the casual observer in the ancient world, the cup was a magical object that reacted to the presence of light in ways that seemed impossible for a solid material. If you placed a candle behind the glass, the emerald exterior transformed into a vibrant crimson, a phenomenon that we now know was caused by the deliberate manipulation of gold and silver at a molecular level. When researchers placed fragments of the glass under an electron microscope, they discovered that the Roman artisans had ground these precious metals into particles so small they were only about 70 nanometers in diameter. This is roughly 1,000 times smaller than a grain of salt. These nanoparticles were dispersed so perfectly through the glass that they could scatter light in different ways depending on the angle of the observer. Creating such a precise mixture required an incredible level of control over temperature and chemical purity that historians once thought was impossible for any civilization before the industrial era. For the Romans, this was likely a closely guarded trade secret, passed down through elite guilds of glassmakers who understood exactly how much metallic dust was needed to achieve the shifting colors. This was essentially an early form of nanotechnology used to create luxury items for the highest levels of society. When the Roman economy fractured and the great urban centers began to shrink, the specialized kilns and the chemical recipes for dichroic glass were lost. Glassmaking reverted to producing simple, translucent vessels, and the ability to command the behavior of light through metal particles vanished for over 1,500 years. The Lycurgus Cup stands as a haunting reminder that what we often view as ancient decoration was sometimes built on a foundation of chemistry that was centuries ahead of its time. This mastery of materials was not limited to stationary art. as other inventors were finding ways to bring the inanimate world to life through the power of hidden gears. Spinning with a frantic energy that seemed driven by invisible ghosts, a hollow bronze sphere in 1st century Alexandria paved the way for a future that never arrived. This mechanical marvel was the creation of a brilliant engineer named Heron, a man who viewed the world as a complex puzzle of air, water, and heat. His invention, the Aeolipile, consisted of a sealed cauldron of water placed over a fire with 2 curved pipes extending from a metal ball above. As the water boiled, the resulting steam was forced through the pipes, creating a thrust that sent the sphere into a rapid, whistling rotation. To the people who gathered in Heron's workshop, this was a charming curiosity or perhaps a clever trick to entertain the elite. They saw fire being converted into movement, yet they viewed it as a toy rather than a tool that could reshape the foundations of their society. The underlying principles of thermodynamics on display were nearly 2,000 years ahead of the Industrial Revolution, representing the first documented instance of steam power being used to create rotary motion. Had this technology been scaled up or coupled with the sophisticated gearing found in other ancient devices, the ancient world might have entered a steam age of its own, potentially ending the reliance on manual labor centuries before the modern era. Instead, the Aeolipile remained a novelty, and the blueprints for its construction were archived in the Great Library, only to be lost when those halls of wisdom were destroyed by fire and neglect. This represents one of history's most profound moments of missed potential, a lost branch of the human story where the spark of industrialization flickered and then went out for over a millennium. The disappearance of this knowledge meant that instead of mastering the power of the engine, humanity continued to rely on the raw physical strength required to reshape the landscape. While steam remained a whisper in the past, the challenge of moving massive objects across the earth forced ancient builders to develop a different kind of mechanical genius. Deep grooves etched into the hardest granite of Egypt tell the story of a mechanical power that seems to defy the limits of hand tools. When we look at the colossal obelisks that stand throughout the Nile Valley, it is not just their height that is impressive, but the surgical precision with which they were carved. Archaeologists have discovered core samples from ancient quarries that reveal clean, spiral drill marks, suggesting that the builders were using tools capable of immense torque and pressure. To cut through a rock as stubborn as rose granite, you need more than just a copper saw and some sand. You need a method of applying constant, high-speed friction that rivals modern diamond-tipped equipment. Some of the stone cylinders pulled from these sites show that the drills were sinking into the rock with a speed and consistency that we still struggle to explain using only the primitive methods usually assigned to that era. This suggests that the ancient Egyptians had mastered the use of abrasive materials and perhaps even large-scale lathes that could spin massive blocks of stone to create perfectly symmetrical pillars. The sheer scale of the engineering required to move these 1,000-ton monoliths from the quarry and stand them upright without snapping them is a feat that vanished from the human toolkit for thousands of years. During the transition into the Middle Ages, the ability to work with and transport such immense weight was largely lost, leaving later generations to look at these towers as the work of giants or gods. It has taken modern researchers years of experimental archaeology, using ropes, sleds, and incredible patience, to even begin to guess how these ancient masters manipulated the literal foundation of the earth. This intense focus on the stability of stone and the secrets of the ground beneath our feet was not unique to Egypt. Thousands of miles away, another civilization was developing a way to listen to the very heartbeat of the planet, creating a device that could sense a disaster before it even arrived. Bronze dragons began to roar across the plains of ancient China whenever the earth shifted hundreds of miles away. This was the work of Zhang, a brilliant polymath of the Han dynasty who created a vessel so sensitive it could detect a disaster before a single person in the imperial court felt the ground move. Known as the Seismoscope, the device was a large bronze urn adorned with 8 dragons, each facing a different cardinal direction and holding a small metal ball in its mouth. Below them sat 8 bronze toads with their mouths wide open, waiting for a signal from the depths of the earth. In the year 138, one of the dragons released its ball with a loud clang into the mouth of a toad, even though the air was still and the people of the capital were undisturbed. Many doubted the machine's accuracy until a messenger arrived days later to report that a massive earthquake had indeed struck a distant province in the exact direction the dragon had indicated. The genius of the device lay in an internal pendulum, so finely balanced that it could filter out local vibrations while responding to the low-frequency waves of a far-off tremor. When a specific wave hit, it would trigger a series of levers and cranks that pushed only one ball out of its socket, providing an early warning that was vital for the administration of a vast empire. Despite its proven success, the specific internal blueprints were lost following the fall of the Han dynasty, and the secret of its calibration remained a mystery for nearly 18 centuries. For generations, people looked at descriptions of the Seismoscope as a blend of myth and decoration, believing it was impossible to build such a sensitive instrument without modern electronics. It took 20th century engineers years of experimentation to recreate a working model that could match the historical accounts, proving that Zhang Heng had mastered the physics of inertia and wave propagation long before the dawn of modern seismology. This device stands as a monument to a time when human observation was so sharp it could hear the whispers of the planet itself. While these bronze dragons were used to monitor the movements of the Earth, other ancient thinkers were turning their eyes toward the heavens to solve a different kind of mystery. Starlight once served as a reliable map for the ancient world, etched into the most ambitious star catalogue of the Mediterranean. The astronomer Hipparchus spent his life documenting the exact positions and brightness of over 1,000 stars, creating a celestial guide that allowed sailors to navigate the pitch-black sea with newfound confidence. For nearly 2,000 years, this legendary document was considered one of history's greatest lost treasures, known only through the passing mentions of later writers. Historians assumed the original data was gone forever until a team of researchers using multispectral imaging looked at a medieval parchment from a monastery in Egypt. They discovered that the monks had scraped away the original Greek text to reuse the expensive vellum, but the faint shadows of the ancient ink remained. These hidden fragments revealed that Hipparchus had calculated the coordinates of the stars with a degree of mathematical accuracy that was centuries ahead of its time. He had even discovered the precession of the equinoxes, which is the slow, wobbling shift in the orientation of the Earth's axis. When this master catalogue vanished from the active records of the Western world, it left a massive gap in our understanding of the universe. For over a millennium, astronomers were forced to rely on less accurate copies or entirely new observations that struggled to match the precision of the original. The loss of such a vital database reminds us that even the most brilliant scientific breakthroughs can be erased if the physical medium carrying them is destroyed or overwritten. This recurring cycle of forgetting is often tied to the tools we use to build our civilizations. While Hipparchus mapped the heights of the heavens, other ancient engineers were inventing massive mechanical limbs to lift the very stones of the earth into the sky. Massive chunks of marble weighing over 6 tons were hoisted hundreds of feet into the air with the help of a mechanical giant known as the Polyspastos. This sophisticated Roman crane transformed the skyline of the ancient world by combining the raw power of human effort with the elegant physics of the compound pulley. While a single person might struggle to lift a heavy bucket of water, A small team of workers walking inside a massive wooden treadwheel could generate enough torque to lift blocks that would crush a modern truck. The genius of the design lay in the arrangement of the sheaves, which distributed the weight so effectively that the tension on the ropes remained manageable even under extreme loads. These machines were the backbone of Roman infrastructure, allowing for the construction of towering temples, arched aqueducts, and the enormous limestone blocks of the Colosseum. When the central authority of Rome collapsed, the specialized knowledge required to build and maintain these multi-leveled lifting systems began to fade. The empire had the wealth and the long-term stability to fund such massive engineering projects, but the fractured kingdoms that followed were often limited to much smaller and simpler devices. For nearly 1,000 years, the vertical ambitions of architects were held back because they could no longer command the mechanical advantage of the great treadwheel cranes. This loss of heavy lifting capability meant that many medieval structures were built with smaller stones that could be carried by hand or moved with basic winches, forever changing the texture and scale of European architecture. The disappearance of the Polyspastos is a clear example of how a civilization's reach is defined by the tools it can no longer afford to build. As the sounds of construction fell silent across the former empire, another group of ancient masters was focusing their attention on a different kind of invisible power. While the Romans conquered the heights with timber and rope, the architects of the Mediterranean were also learning how to shape the very air to carry the human voice across vast distances with perfect clarity. Bronze and ceramic vessels hidden beneath the stone benches of ancient theaters acted as invisible microphones for the Greek and Roman world. These acoustic vases were not mere decorations but carefully tuned resonance chambers designed to solve the problem of carrying sound to the back of a massive outdoor arena. In a theater holding 20,000 people, an actor standing center stage needed their voice to reach every ear with perfect clarity. The architect Vitruvius described a system where these vases were placed in niches at precise mathematical intervals based on musical scales. When a performer spoke, the air inside the jars would vibrate in sympathy with specific frequencies, amplifying the vowels and consonants and projecting them upward toward the highest tiers. This allowed a simple whisper to travel across hundreds of feet of open air without being lost to the wind or the chatter of the crowd. The genius of this system required a level of knowledge in harmonics and physics that was centuries ahead of its time. When the Roman Empire collapsed, the specialized blueprints for these theaters were abandoned, and the secret of how to tune a room using hollow jars was forgotten. For more than 1,000 years, architects building cathedrals and grand halls struggled with echoes and dead zones, unable to replicate the crystal-clear sound of the ancient stage. This sophisticated understanding of the invisible waves around us shows that the ancients were not just building structures, they were manipulating the very environment to serve the human experience. This mastery extended from the echoes in the air down to the very soil that fed their growing populations, leading to agricultural breakthroughs that could turn a wasteland into a garden. Lush greenery of the Amazon rainforest hides a dark secret buried deep within the forest floor that challenges everything we know about sustainability. While the tropical soil in this region is typically thin and acidic, researchers discovered vast patches of a mysterious jet-black earth that remains incredibly fertile even after 2,000 years. This material, known as Terra Preta, is not a natural occurrence but a deliberate invention of ancient indigenous civilizations. By mixing charcoal, bone fragments, and organic waste into the ground, these early farmers created a living ecosystem that actually regenerates itself over time. The charcoal acts like a microscopic sponge, trapping nutrients and providing a home for beneficial bacteria that pull nitrogen from the air. This allowed massive, complex societies to grow food in a landscape that modern science once considered a green desert. When these cultures eventually faded away, the specific recipe and the layering techniques required to maintain this miracle soil were swallowed by the jungle. For centuries, the world forgot that the Amazon was once home to an agricultural technology that could solve our modern soil depletion crisis. We are only now beginning to understand that these ancient people were not just living in the wild, they were engineering the very earth beneath their feet to be a permanent source of life. This ability to manipulate the environment for the long-term survival of a community required more than just good soil. It required a way to keep those communities connected across impossible distances. High atop the mountain peaks of the ancient world, a different kind of invisible intelligence was at work using the speed of light to bridge the gap between empires. Before the invention of the telegraph or the radio, people developed a sophisticated system of fire and mirrors that could send a message across hundreds of miles in a single evening. By using a series of relay stations positioned on high ridges, a general could receive news of a border crossing or a royal birth almost as fast as a modern text message. These signal towers were carefully calibrated to ensure that the light was visible even in hazy conditions, using specialized polished bronze reflectors to focus the flame. The coding for these messages was surprisingly complex, involving specific patterns of flashes that could communicate everything from the size of an approaching group to the specific needs of a distant outpost. When the centralized governments that funded these expensive networks collapsed, the towers fell into ruin and the synchronized language of light was lost to the wind. This disappearance of instant communication meant the world became a much larger and more isolated place, where news traveled only as fast as a horse could gallop. The loss of such a high-speed network reminds us that the connectivity we take for granted today was a reality once before, only to be extinguished for over 1,000 years. As these signal fires went dark, the quest for durable and beautiful materials continued to drive ancient innovators to experiment with the very chemistry of the earth. Torches flickering from the high peaks of the Mediterranean once formed an invisible web of information that functioned like a prehistoric internet. This Roman fire telegraph was not just a simple warning system, but a sophisticated method of data transmission that allowed the emperors to manage a territory spanning 3 continents. Each station was equipped with a set of 2 walls or 5 torches, and by raising combinations of these lights in a specific order, our operator could spell out complex messages using a grid system. This meant that detailed reports about grain shipments, troop movements, or political shifts could travel from the borders of Scotland to the heart of Rome in a single day. The success of the system relied on an absolute mastery of timing and a shared linguistic code that every watchman along the line had to know by heart. When the central administration of the empire began to crumble, the funding for these remote towers dried up and the specialized training for the signalers was lost. For the next 1,000 years, the world essentially grew larger because the speed of information dropped back down to the pace of a walking messenger. The loss of this rapid connectivity meant that coordination across vast distances became nearly impossible, leading to a more fragmented and isolated existence for European societies. It was a regression in human communication that would not be corrected until the invention of the telegraph in the 1800s. While these towers were being used to bridge the physical gap between distant lands, other ancient specialists were using high-precision tools to bridge the gap between life and healing. In the quiet rooms of ancient medical clinics, doctors were using surgical instruments made of high-quality bronze and steel that featured a level of craftsmanship almost indistinguishable from modern tools. Excavations at sites like Pompeii have revealed scalpels, bone drills, and delicate forceps that were designed with an ergonomic precision that vanished for centuries. These healers understood the importance of clean, sharp edges and specialized shapes for different procedures, such as removing cataracts or repairing bone injuries. When the specialized workshops that produced these medical-grade alloys closed, the surgeons of the following eras were often forced to use cruder, multipurpose iron tools. This decline in the quality of surgical equipment made medical procedures far more dangerous and less precise, marking a long period where the sophisticated anatomical knowledge of the past stayed buried in forgotten manuscripts. This shift from refined medical technology to more basic methods reminds us that progress is not always a straight line forward. As the tools of the doctor became simpler, the grand machines used to entertain the masses also began to rust away into the shadows of history. Precision instruments of the ancient medical world were so refined that a modern surgeon would recognize them instantly. In the ruins of Pompeii and across the former Roman Empire, archaeologists have unearthed surgical kits containing thin-bladed scalpels, specialized bone drills, and delicate forceps made from high-quality bronze and steel. These were not primitive tools used for rough work, but were instead part of a sophisticated medical system that valued accuracy and ergonomic design. Evidence from analyzed skeletons proves that ancient doctors used these tools to perform successful brain surgeries and even removed cataracts by carefully displacing the clouded lens of the eye. This level of anatomical understanding required specialized training and a commitment to practices that mirrored modern sterilization, such as boiling instruments or using vinegar as an early antiseptic. When the Roman social structure collapsed, the professional guilds of physicians and the legendary medical schools of Alexandria were dismantled. The specialized metallurgy needed to create such sharp and durable instruments was also lost, forcing healers in the centuries that followed to rely on much simpler iron knives. As these precise tools disappeared, the deep knowledge of the human body was replaced by more basic theories that lacked the empirical rigor of the past. It would take nearly 1,500 years for the medical community to once again reach the level of surgical skill and tool quality seen in the ancient world. The loss of these instruments meant that for generations, procedures that were once routine became far more dangerous and often impossible. This decline in health technology was not just limited to the physical tools of the doctor, but also extended to the very substances used to treat the sick. Long before the era of modern pharmacies, the ancients possessed a chemical secret that could soothe pain and heal wounds with a potency that was forgotten for 1,000 years. This led to a period where the natural world was no longer seen as a source of precise medicine, but as a place of mystery and unrefined cures. Golden coins from the ancient city of Cyrene bore the image of a heart-shaped seed that was once the most sought-after prize in the Mediterranean. This was Silphium, a wild plant that grew only along a narrow strip of land in modern-day Libya and became the foundation of a pharmaceutical empire. It was so essential to the Roman and Greek way of life that it was stored in the official treasury alongside gold and silver. Physicians hailed it as a wonder drug, using it to treat everything from fevers and coughs to more complex digestive issues. Perhaps most significantly, Silphium was prized as a highly effective and safe form of birth control, a biological tool that allowed ancient societies to manage their populations with a precision that was lost for centuries. For hundreds of years, the demand for this plant was so intense that it became a victim of its own success. Despite the efforts of local governors to regulate the harvest, a combination of overgrazing by sheep and a shifting climate caused the plant to wither away. By the middle of the 1st century, the naturalist Pliny reported that only a single stalk of Silphium had been found, which was promptly sent to Emperor Nero as a final, lonely curiosity. When this plant vanished, it took with it a level of reproductive autonomy and medical reliability that would not be matched until the 20th century. Doctors were forced to turn to substitutes like asafoetida, which were far less potent and often left patients searching for the lost efficacy of the original. This biological disappearance serves as a stark reminder that some of history's greatest technological edges were grown from the Earth, and once the ecological chain is broken, the knowledge of how to use them becomes a ghost. As the living wonders of the ancient world faded, the focus shifted toward creating life in a different form, using the cold precision of moving parts and hidden air pressure. This was the era of the first robots, where bronze and steam replaced the fragility of nature. Bronze doors guarding the great temples of Roman Egypt seemed to possess a life of their own as they swung open without a single person touching the handles. This was not the work of a supernatural force but the mechanical genius of Hero of Alexandria, who transformed the act of entering a sacred space into a display of high technology. He designed a hidden system of siphons, pulleys, and water tanks buried beneath the temple floor to automate the movement of the heavy stone and metal gates. When a priest lit a fire on the altar outside the temple, the heat would expand the air inside a sealed vessel, forcing water into a large bucket connected to a set of counterweights. As the bucket became heavy and dropped, it pulled the ropes that turned the door hinges, creating the illusion of a divine invitation. Once the fire went out, the air cooled and the water was siphoned back into its original container, causing the doors to close silently behind the faithful. This early mastery of pneumatics and atmospheric pressure was used primarily to inspire awe rather than to drive spinning mills or heavy industry. For the people of the first century, witnessing a massive structure react to heat was a glimpse into a future where machines could handle the physical burdens of life. However, as the ancient religious centers were slowly abandoned or dismantled, the intricate plumbing and the specialized knowledge of air pressure began to corrode and vanish. The world lost interest in automated entry, and the blueprints for these self-moving doors remained locked away in scrolls that few could read. It would take nearly 2,000 years for the concept of the automatic door to return to the public square, leaving a long era where every gate and every entrance required the raw strength of a human arm. While Heron was using heat to move stone, other inventors were focusing on the power of sunlight to create a defensive weapon that could set the world on fire. Deep within the stories of the siege of Syracuse, we find accounts of polished mirrors that turned the sun into a concentrated beam of destruction. Under the guidance of the mathematician Archimedes, soldiers allegedly used large arrays of bronze reflectors to focus solar energy onto the wooden hulls of an invading fleet. By aligning these mirrors at the perfect angle, they could create a point of heat so intense that the Roman ships began to smolder and burst into flames from hundreds of feet away. For centuries, modern scientists dismissed this as a myth, believing that the technology needed to create a curved, focusing surface was beyond the reach of the era. Yet, recent experiments have shown that with enough coordinated reflectors, such a solar ray is not only possible but devastatingly effective. This level of optical precision and heat management was lost as the specific mathematical schools of the Mediterranean faded, leaving behind only the terrifying memory of a fleet burned by the sky. This ability to weaponize the natural elements shows that the ancients were not just observers of the world, but were actively learning how to command the very laws of physics to protect their borders. Polished bronze shields held by soldiers along the walls of Syracuse became the components of a deadly optical machine. By lining up these reflectors to catch the midday sun, the mathematician Archimedes created a concentrated point of heat that transformed light into a long-distance weapon. Historical accounts describe a blinding beam that reached out across the water to touch the wooden hulls of the Roman fleet, causing them to smoke and suddenly erupt into flames. For centuries, modern historians argued that this was a mathematical impossibility, believing the ancients lacked the necessary precision in their metalwork. However, recent scientific trials using large arrays of mirrored surfaces have successfully ignited wood from over 100 feet away, proving that the geometry of the era was more than capable of such a feat. The secret lay in the specific curvature and the coordinated movement of the mirrors to track the sun and focus the energy onto a moving target. When Archimedes was lost during the fall of the city, the complex physics of solar ignition vanished with him, and the world returned to the simple physics of catapults and arrows. This represents a significant break in the history of science where the study of optics shifted away from practical machines and back into the realm of theory. The disappearance of the heat ray meant that for the next 15 centuries, the power of the sun remained untapped as a source of energy or defense. As the fires of the Syracuse fleet eventually burned out, the focus of ancient ingenuity shifted from the heat of the sky to the cooling of the earth beneath their feet. While one civilization was learning how to start fires with light, another was mastering the art of freezing the desert air to survive the blistering heat of the summer months. Ancient Persian engineers created massive conical structures known as yakchuls that functioned as prehistoric refrigerators without a single wire or battery. These towers were built with specialized insulating walls made of a mix of sand, clay, egg whites, and goat hair, which were almost completely resistant to heat transfer. By using horizontal wind catchers and deep subterranean chambers, they could channel cool night air into the base of the structure to freeze water in shallow pools. The resulting ice was then stored in deep pits where it remained frozen throughout the entire year, even in the middle of a desert summer. This allowed people to enjoy chilled food and ice during the most brutal heat, a luxury that would be entirely lost to much of the world for over 1,000 years after the decline of these regional empires. The loss of these passive cooling systems forced humanity to wait until the invention of modern chemicals and electricity to rediscover the comfort of the cold. This mastery of the temperature and the environment shows that the ancients were not just surviving the elements, they were redesigning the very laws of their surroundings to fit the needs of a thriving civilization. Deep subterranean chambers chilled by the natural breath of the wind allowed ancient Persians to taste ice in the middle of a scorching desert. These towering structures, known as yakchuls, were architectural wonders that operated as passive refrigerators without the need for a single watt of electricity. From the outside, a yakchul looked like a massive mud brick cone rising from the sand, but its true genius lay in its internal cooling system and the specialized composition of its walls. The builders used an ingenious mortar called saruj, a mixture of sand, clay, egg whites, lime, goat hair, and ash that was almost entirely resistant to heat transfer and completely waterproof. This thick insulation acted as a thermal shield, keeping the blistering sun from penetrating the core of the structure. To create the cold, long and shallow channels of water were positioned to the north of the tower, shaded by high walls so they would freeze during the cold desert nights. This ice was then harvested and moved into deep pits inside the yakchul, where a system of wind catchers on the roof funneled even the slightest breeze downward. As the wind passed over the subterranean water and ice, it triggered an evaporative cooling process that dropped the internal temperature to sub-zero levels. This allowed for the storage of food, medicine, and even frozen treats for the royal court throughout the entire year. The knowledge of how to balance these delicate drafts and maintain the structural integrity of the saruj mortar was a highly specialized skill passed down through generations of desert engineers. When modern refrigeration technology arrived in the 20th century, these ancient domes were slowly abandoned, and the precise techniques for their maintenance began to evaporate from the collective memory. The loss of the yakchul marked the end of an era where humanity could command the temperature of their environment using nothing but the physics of air and earth. This mastery over the physical state of matter went even further in the Roman world, where artisans allegedly created a material that defied the very nature of light and shadow. While the Persians were freezing the air, Roman glassmakers were rumored to have invented a type of glass that was as durable as metal and could be hammered back into shape. This legendary substance, known as flexible glass, was reportedly presented to Emperor Tiberius by a craftsman who threw a glass bowl to the floor only for it to dent rather than shatter. The inventor then used a small hammer to beat the glass back into its original form, proving that he had solved the fundamental brittleness of the material. Fearing that such an invention would devalue gold and silver, the emperor supposedly had the workshop destroyed and the secret buried. Whether this story is an exaggeration or a lost truth of ancient chemistry, it points to a time when the boundaries between materials were far more fluid than we realize. As we look at these lost wonders of the desert and the workshop, it becomes clear that our ancestors were constantly pushing the limits of what was thought to be possible. Bending glass like a sheet of soft copper seemed like a miracle in the court of Emperor Tiberius. This legendary substance, known as vitrum flexile, represented a breakthrough that would have fundamentally changed the trajectory of human industry. The story goes that a master craftsman approached the Roman leader and presented a glass bowl of such incredible quality that it was as clear as the finest crystal. To demonstrate its unique properties, the man threw the vessel against the marble floor with great force. Instead of exploding into thousands of sharp shards, the bowl merely dented, as if it were made of bronze or silver. The inventor then took out a small hammer and calmly pounded the glass back into its original shape right before the eyes of the stunned emperor. While this should have been the start of a new technological era, it actually led to a swift and quiet tragedy. Tiberius asked if anyone else knew the secret of the glass, and when the craftsman replied that he alone held the recipe, the emperor ordered his execution and the destruction of his workshop. He feared that a material as beautiful as glass but as durable as metal would make the gold and silver of the imperial treasury worthless. With that single decision, a material that could have revolutionized everything from storage to architecture was erased from history. For centuries, scholars dismissed this account as a complete fabrication, believing that the molecular structure of glass makes flexibility an impossibility. However, modern researchers are beginning to reconsider the legend in the light of new chemistry. We now know that adding specific minerals or using certain cooling techniques can create glass that is incredibly thin and pliable, much like the screens on our modern smartphones. It is possible the Roman chemist had discovered a unique additive or a specific thermal process that allowed the glass to absorb impact rather than shattering. The loss of vitrum flexile meant that for the next 2,000 years, humanity was forced to treat glass as one of its most fragile and dangerous materials. This suppression of a revolutionary invention reminds us that progress is often at the mercy of those in power who value stability over innovation. As the secret of the unbreakable bowl died in the Roman court, the ancient world continued to pour its genius into other materials that served as symbols of status and authority. Beyond the durability of their tools, the ancients were obsessed with the colors they used to clothe their leaders, leading to the creation of a dye so rare it was worth more than its weight in gold. Stains of deep violet once signaled a level of wealth that surpassed the value of precious gems and silver. This legendary pigment, known as Tyrian purple, was the most prized substance in the ancient world, reserved exclusively for the robes of emperors and the halls of power. Unlike modern dyes that fade and dull over time, this unique color actually became more vivid and saturated when exposed to sunlight and the salt air of the sea. The source of this miraculous tint was a tiny, unremarkable sea snail called the murex, found along the rocky coasts of the Mediterranean. To produce just 1 small gram of the dye, thousands of these snails had to be harvested and their specialized glands removed with painstaking precision. The extraction was followed by a complex fermentation process in large lead vats, where the chemistry of the snail remains reacted with the air to transform from a pale cream to a brilliant royal hue. This industry was so lucrative that the Phoenician city of Tyre became a global hub of commerce, and the secret of the perfect fermentation timing was a closely guarded family legacy. When the Byzantine Empire finally collapsed and its specialized state factories were destroyed, the precise sequence of heating and chemical additions was lost to the ruins of history. For centuries, artists and weavers were forced to use weaker, brownish alternatives made from berries or roots, unable to replicate the deep luminescence of the original imperial purple. It took modern researchers until the 20th century to finally decode the complex biological and chemical reactions of the murex snail, rediscovering a process that had been a pillar of ancient luxury. The disappearance of this dye shows how even the most vibrant aspects of a culture can vanish when the specific artisans who hold the knowledge are gone. While the elites focused on the beauty of their garments, the great thinkers of the following era were turning their attention toward the complexity of the machine. In the workshops of the Islamic Golden Age, a new generation of inventors was developing a type of mechanical intelligence that would give rise to the first programmable machines. These innovators designed intricate water clocks and humanoid figures that could move on their own, using a system of cams and crankshafts that would eventually form the backbone of modern engineering. This shift from static materials to self-moving devices represented a leap in human capability that would wait nearly 1,000 years to be fully realized by the outside world. Mechanical birds chirped and golden dragons roared as a giant bronze elephant carried a hidden world of gears through the courts of the 12th century. This spectacular creation, known as the elephant clock, was the crowning achievement of Ismail Al-Jazari, a master engineer who lived during the Islamic Golden Age. Standing over 7 feet tall, the clock was not just a timekeeper but a mechanical tribute to the interconnectedness of human knowledge. It featured a Chinese dragon, an Egyptian phoenix, a Greek water system, and an Indian elephant, all working in perfect synchronization to mark the half-hour. The internal logic of the machine relied on a heavy perforated bowl floating in a hidden tank of water. As the bowl slowly filled and sank, it pulled a series of ropes and pulleys that triggered the automata at the top. A mechanical scribe would point to the minutes, while a set of falling metal balls caused the dragons to tip and the birds to sing. This was a peak of mechanical integration that used a sophisticated system of cams and crankshafts, components that are still fundamental to the engines in our modern cars. While Europe was still centuries away from this level of precision, Al-Jazari was essentially building the ancestors of the modern robot. He even documented his work in a lavishly illustrated book, providing clear blueprints for how to construct these self-moving wonders. Despite the brilliance of these designs, many of his more complex inventions were eventually dismissed as mere playthings for the wealthy and the powerful. When the Mongol invasions and shifting political tides disrupted the great centers of learning, the momentum toward an early mechanical revolution slowed down. The delicate balance of weights and water that powered the elephant was lost to the history of technology, remaining a hidden bridge between the simple levers of the past and the automated world of the future. While these machines were tracking the hours on land, other ancient masters were creating a map of the world so precise it seemed to include lands that would not be officially discovered for centuries. This specialized understanding of the globe suggests that the ancients possessed a vision of the Earth that was far wider than we ever imagined. Faded ink and salt-stained parchment once held the exact coordinates of every hidden reef and deep harbor across the Indian Ocean. These documents, known as the Periplus Guides, functioned as a sophisticated maritime database that was far more useful than a simple drawing. While common maps of the era often included mythical beasts and imagined coastlines, a periplus was a rigorous technical manual filled with data on tidal patterns, water depths, and the precise distances between commercial hubs. A merchant ship could use these guides to navigate from the Red Sea to the coast of India, with a degree of certainty that saved months of travel and countless lives. The creators of these maps possessed a deep understanding of the monsoon winds and the seasonal physics of the ocean, allowing them to turn a chaotic wilderness of water into a predictable highway of trade. When the interconnected economies of Rome and the East began to pull apart, these highly specialized guides stopped being copied, and the detailed knowledge they contained began to evaporate. Within a few generations, the master navigators who could read the subtle indicators of the coastline were gone, replaced by sailors who were forced to rely on vague rumors and dangerous guesswork. This loss essentially shrank the known map of the world, making distant lands feel like distant legends once again. For nearly 1,000 years, European and Middle Eastern vessels stayed closer to the shore, losing the ability to strike out across the deep water with the confidence of their ancestors. This disappearance of geographical precision meant that the world became a larger and more mysterious place, where the simple act of reaching a neighbor required a bravery that had previously been supported by data. As the clear paths of the ocean were forgotten, the focus of ancient engineering returned to the land, specifically to the incredible structures of the East that seemed to be held together by a force stronger than stone. In the temples and tombs of ancient China, builders were developing a secret ingredient for their mortar that would make their walls virtually indestructible. While the Romans used volcanic ash, these Eastern engineers discovered that the secret to a permanent structure lay in a common food staple. By mixing a decoction of sticky rice with slaked lime, they created a compound that was far more water-resistant and durable than standard mortar. This organic and mineral hybrid was used to build the Great Wall and a variety of massive pagodas that have survived powerful earthquakes and centuries of erosion. The amylopectin in the rice created a tight molecular bond with the calcium carbonate, making the mortar so hard that modern workers often find it difficult to remove even with power tools. When the specific proportions and harvesting techniques for this sticky rice mortar were no longer passed down, the secret of building such resilient structures was lost to the common builder. It is a striking example of how a simple dietary item could be transformed into the backbone of an empire, proving that the ancients could find the most advanced solutions in the most unexpected places. Grains of sticky rice served as the secret ingredient in a mortar so powerful it could withstand the tremors of a massive earthquake, while builders in other parts of the world relied on simple mud or lime. The engineers of ancient China discovered that a common food staple could be transformed into a molecular adhesive. By mixing a soup of glutinous rice with slaked lime, they created a chemical bond that exceeded the strength of almost any other masonry material of the era. The secret lay in the amylopectin, a complex carbohydrate in the rice that reacted with the calcium carbonate in the lime to form a compact and incredibly resilient microstructure. This organic and mineral hybrid was used to secure the massive stones of the Great Wall and the foundations of towering pagodas that have survived for over 1,000 years. Even today, historians and engineers are stunned to find that this ancient mortar is often harder and more water-resistant than modern cement. In some cases, the bond is so tight that the bricks themselves will break before the mortar gives way. As building techniques evolved and the labor-intensive process of preparing the rice became less practical, the exact proportions of the recipe were eventually lost to the common builder. It was only through recent chemical analysis that modern scientists rediscovered why these ancient structures refused to crumble. This mastery of the Earth's natural chemistry allowed the ancients to build vertical monuments that seemed to defy time, but their ambitions did not stop at the ground. Far above the dust of the construction sites, other pioneers were experimenting with the very air itself, dreaming of a way to glide among the clouds. Stories from the ancient courts of the East speak of flying chariots and wooden birds that could carry a person across the sky for hundreds of paces. These early gliders and kites were originally designed for military reconnaissance and signaling, utilizing lightweight bamboo frames and high-quality silk to catch the rising thermals. The builders possessed a sophisticated understanding of lift and drag long before the birth of modern aerodynamics. When the specialized knowledge of how to balance these delicate wings vanished, the dream of human flight was grounded for nearly a millennium. The loss of these early aeronautical experiments meant that the sky became a forbidden territory once again, leaving later generations to look at the birds with a sense of wonder and a deep feeling of something forgotten. Silk and feathers stretched across thin wooden frames once carried the weight of human ambition into the open sky. Long before the era of modern aviation, early pioneers in the 8th and 9th centuries were already experimenting with the physics of controlled descent. In the city of Cordoba, the inventor Abbas ibn Firnas designed a set of wings that allowed him to glide for a short distance, a feat that demonstrated a surprising grasp of aerodynamics and air resistance. By observing the flight of birds and the way wings catch the rising thermals of hot air, these ancient thinkers were attempting to solve the mystery of lift without the aid of engines. These attempts were not limited to a single region, as records from the Han Dynasty describe soldiers using massive silk kites to lift observers into the air for military reconnaissance. These gliders represented a sophisticated understanding of balance and weight distribution that was centuries ahead of its time. However, because these experiments were often performed in isolation and were sometimes viewed as dangerous or impossible, the technical insights were rarely written down in detail. When the individual inventors passed away, their knowledge of wing curvature and structural tension disappeared with them. This grounded the dream of flight for another 1,000 years, leaving the sky to the birds until the sketches of Leonardo da Vinci began to revisit the same principles. The loss of this aeronautical curiosity meant that humanity lived for centuries with its feet firmly planted on the earth, forgetting that the path to the clouds had already been briefly charted. As the silence of the skies remained unbroken, we are reminded that even the sounds of the ancient world have their own lost technologies. Throughout history, musicians used instruments of such complex design and rare materials that their true voices can no longer be heard today. These lost notes suggest that the ancients didn't just master the physical world, but also the invisible art of sound and emotion through machines we are only now beginning to reconstruct. Would you like to hear about the final mystery of the ancient instruments and the lost music of the past? Thundering music once filled the massive stone arenas of Rome using a power source that seemed to breathe with the weight of the sea. This was the hydraulis, a massive water organ that stood as the most complex musical instrument of the ancient world. Invented in the 3rd century before the Common Era by a Greek engineer, the device used a large chamber of water to maintain a constant and powerful air pressure for its rows of bronze pipes. Unlike later organs that relied on the inconsistent pumping of leather bellows, the hydraulis produced a steady, piercing sound that could be heard over the roar of thousands of spectators at the public games. It was a mechanical giant, requiring a team of operators to manage the water levels and the delicate keyboard that allowed a single performer to command an entire orchestra of tones. The mastery of fluid dynamics and precision metalwork required to build a hydraulis was so advanced that it was considered the pinnacle of high society entertainment. When the grand ceremonies of the empire were replaced by the smaller, quieter gatherings of the early Middle Ages, the demand for such a thunderous machine evaporated. The specialized skills needed to calibrate the water valves and tune the heavy pipes were lost as the great cultural centers collapsed. For the next several hundred years, the world grew quieter, and the secret of using water to create music vanished from the earth. The simpler instruments that followed were but shadows of this hydraulic masterpiece, taking nearly 1,000 years to regain the same level of technical sophistication. This silence marks the end of our journey through 30 wonders that once defined the peak of human capability. Looking back at these lost relics, we see that the history of progress is not an unbroken line, but a series of brilliant peaks and deep shadows. Our ancestors reached for the stars, mastered the elements, and built a world of incredible complexity, only for much of that genius to be swallowed by time. These stories serve as a reminder that the knowledge we possess today is a precious flame that must be guarded, lest our own greatest breakthroughs one day become nothing more than mysterious whispers for the future to find.